Welcome to Macmillan 180. For nearly the past 25 years, students and faculty of the University of British Columbia's Animal Welfare Program have gathered here to share ideas, learn, and enjoy lunch. To celebrate our 25th anniversary, the Animal Welfare Program hosted a series of webinars to virtually invite our diverse alumni to join us once again around the table to ruminate in Room 180. My name is Megan Locke, and I work with the Animal Welfare Program. I will be the host of today's podcast. Welcome to episode 0 of Ruminating in Room 180. Before we kicked off our 8-episode series, we ran an internal rehearsal webinar at the very beginning of the academic year and came away with such engaging content, it would be a shame to never publish it. Thanks to our faculty members, Dan Weary, the moderator of the session, Nina von Kaiserlink, and Sasha Protopopova, as well as Professor Emeritus David Fraser, the AWP is pleased to present to you a sneak preview of what is to come with this series. And first, we would like to acknowledge that the Animal Welfare Program aims to improve the lives of animals through research, education, and outreach. Students, faculty, and visitors in the AWP come from all around the world. We recognize that many members of the AWP are settlers in Canada. We acknowledge that we regularly gather, reside, work, and interact with animals on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish Peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam and Stolo nations. With Ruminating in Room 180, we want to bring you, the listener, on a journey from the past to the present and the future of animal welfare. To start off, Dan asked Nina, David, and Sasha to reflect on the past with their favorite memories and the lessons that they have learned.
What's a favorite memory you have from the time that you've been at the AWP?
So my favorite memory is one that is, I guess, is the longitudinal nature of the program, and that's lunch. It's not a memory that was a one-time. It's 21 years for me of memories.
I thought I would bring a very old memory, probably 1996, when NSERC had agreed to fund the industrial research chair in animal welfare, and the program hadn't started. The plan was one faculty member. I said, I think it would work better if we have 2 faculty members. And I had a candidate in mind. To cut a long story short, Dan was selected as the candidate, but then came the issue of would he accept the offer? Because he already had a permanent job at another research institute in Quebec, which would have put him close to his and his wife's family. One evening, I got a phone call from Jim Thompson, then head of the Animal Science Department, to say that Dan, although never having had an academic appointment or taught an undergrad class, would be appointed associate professor with instant tenure, which speaks to both Dan's accomplishments and Jim's powers of persuasion with groups like the Senior Appointments Committee.
I guess I have a much more recent memory, David, to complement the one that you just told. For the NSERC IRC evaluation, all of the evaluators came to evaluate whether we can add the last IRC, myself, to the program. I never felt so supported by the team. So many students came out to advocate. All of the faculty were there. So David, kind of to end your story with my story, I think that shows that this is a continuation of events, which is really great.
Thank you all. Those are great memories. Okay, a second question for you. Is there one lesson learned from the time you've been at the AWP that you think has been particularly helpful for you in your career?
I probably remember the best the difference before and after coming. And I think for me, the focus on one welfare and the interconnectedness of everything has really been transformative. I've always felt myself that I'm already interested in that kind of connection, those connections. But I think with David, with Nina and Dan and you, and certainly the students' work, all really kind of highlight these connections so thoroughly and so well. And so I think for me now, I can't come back from that. I can never think of anything independently of anything else anymore.
Around the time the program started, the Federal Minister of Justice was proposing changes to the criminal code in the cruelty to animals provisions. It was duly passed by the Commons and then defeated by the Senate. Then the similar legislation was brought back 4 more times. In each of the 5 times, under 3 justice ministers, it was passed by the Commons and defeated by the Senate and never became law. In the meantime, with all this effort, I had seen tremendous changes through working with Burger King, with the Food Marketing Institute, which are food retailers in the US, and of course in Canada, working through the Code of Practice process. My lesson learned here is, by all means, include government when appropriate, but treat it as the remedy of last resort. If there's any other way that you can see to achieve change, try that first. That is a long lesson learned over a long period of time.
More on a personal level, that I think what I've, at least over the last 20 years, have learned that, and also I think it's what drives my passion, is allowing the students to try to empower them to succeed. Everybody's different, but everybody has a story to tell. You know, the students join the animal welfare program because they're like the rest of us, you know, have this passion that drives them, but it's trying to figure out how each of those students is able to act on that passion in a scholarly way. Because I think that's one of our greatest accomplishments as a program, is not the 300 papers or whatever that we published. It's the contributions to these students, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level, because they're the ones that are going to take the next step after at least us three oldies are no longer around. But anyways, that's what I think I've learned and been humbled by the passion, been humbled by it.
Moving into the present, Dan asked the panel for advice for current or future students. Sasha brings up human-related issues, which perseveres as a theme through the rest of the webinar.
Do you have a special piece of advice for current or future students working in the program, or just more generally in the field of animal welfare?
I would say, if you're working with animals, really get to know them first. I think the critical thing is to develop the kind of intuitive understanding of animals that come from working with them and observing them closely at hand.
That is really, really fantastic advice. I definitely agree with that. My advice would be to focus on the human issues, or at least don't forget to focus on the human associated issues as well. Kind of going back to that one welfare concept in conjunction with that. Don't forget yourself, your own human person, that your own welfare, well-being. We get exposed to a lot of difficult situations out in the world. And if we don't take care of ourselves, we won't last. And so if we want to make change, we really have to protect ourselves as well.
Just to riff off what Sasha and Dave said, I think the sort of a guiding sentence that I often think about is, you know, science can only tell us what the options are. It can't tell us what we ought to do. And so the bringing together of sort of the concepts of animal welfare that David and Dan published in that original paper in 1997, that really is a foundational paper, I think, for many of our courses and everything that we do, but also to not forget that animal welfare is a socially mandated science, and people matter, you know, and they bring their values to the table. And I think also, you know, in regards to the students themselves, I often say, and I think many of the students that have heard me say this, you know, the animal welfare program, your time here is, I mean, you're here to learn, you're here to experience, and a community of scholarship that's focused on animal welfare. At the end of the day, you need to find your passion and, you know, work hard Monday to Friday and then take a 48-hour holiday. You also need to take a break. Don't expect for change to happen overnight. If you're in this game, for some of this, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. This is an area where we use scholarship to discuss these things. So it's one step at a time, but hopefully you'll be able to find your passion and how you contribute to it.
Especially relevant for current graduate students writing papers, Dan opened the floor for any suggestions on how to improve the writing process, prompting some creative ideas to be shared by Sasha, David, and Nina.
What have you learned about the writing process, and what advice could you share with AWP students in terms of what you've learned?
My writing has become more and more difficult, not easier, because emails are always in the way. So perhaps the best advice I have is to write somewhere where you don't have access to your emails, or just turn them off for the couple of hours. It's much more helpful for me to have a whole chunk of time to write, like a half a day or even a whole day, if it's possible, maybe a whole week, do like a writing retreat.
Something that I used to do a lot and don't do hardly at all now. I used to go for long walks with a dictaphone and found that I got a better focus and flow of words in that situation than I could sitting at a desk. I've always found that a great help to writing. My other piece of advice is, oh my goodness, making things simple and plain, as close to ordinary speech as possible.
Try to break it down into small chunks, send it chunks at a time and get feedback. It's an iterative process, and it's going to take 10 or 15 drafts if you've never done this before. I don't want you to worry about that. My very first paper was probably 20 drafts, right? It's a skill that you have to learn, and you learn by getting constructive feedback. And so try not to be overwhelmed by it. One way to not to be overwhelmed is to take it chunks at a time.
I was given slightly inappropriate advice once, but I really like it. It's a write drunk, edit sober. Even without the actual meaning, I think it does make sense quite a bit that we let anxiety kind of prevent us from putting some words on paper. And so don't be afraid in that first draft to just kind of put in word vomit, and then you can always edit that later.
Loosen the tongue, then discipline the pen.
Better, more appropriate, did.
Now looking to the future, Dan posed a question to the panel about who the AWP should partner with and how, and included a response of his own. The panel discussed climate change in their answers, which is a pertinent issue that is covered time and time again in our future podcast episodes.
Who do you think are or should be our partners thinking forward to the next 25 years? And how do we do a better job of connecting with them? And I'll just maybe jump in with one response to that of my own in relation to the current event, is I think in a way now we have the opportunity of having this wonderful army of alumni as partners. And I'm hoping that this will be at least one small step of better engaging with them.
I find it a bit of a tricky question. I think one perhaps key partner that I know I haven't engaged with as much as I should are probably veterinarians, local veterinarians, and others who are kind of on the ground caring for animals. Because certainly we share lots and lots of aims with veterinary societies and communities, but yet occasionally I think we could probably do a better job of putting our forces together. And I think finding partners that are focused on climate change itself or modeling environmental impacts. I'm thinking back to Ben, who was a student with us. He was very interested to know how animal welfare fit into topics of climate change. How do we give information about welfare and what's important in welfare as climate scientists and governments start to create this new world so that just that animals are not left behind? And because I think there's a lot of interest in this, but perhaps we're not kind of pushing the right information out there that's accessible and that's understandable for these kind of new programs.
I would say conservationists, the focus until now within animal welfare has been those animals directly under human control. But what we've seen over the past century is how human technologies, especially those that either were invented or developed hugely in the last century, have a huge impact on the welfare of free living wildlife. There is a whole new class of animal welfare problems caused by these forms of technology, almost certainly with climate change heading the list without question. So here is a whole new challenge for animal welfare science that needs to be done in cooperation with, as Sasha says, people involved with climate change and other aspects of wildlife and environmental conservation.
Just to echo what both of you say, I think these, again, sort of take an interdisciplinarity to the next level. I think the climate change is a great example where I think many of these conversations have already really gained traction and animal welfare hasn't been part of the space. And so you're seeing a lot of the animal industries who are now really promoting what they do in terms of mitigating effects on the environment, and it's exclusively about the environment. And many of those solutions really come back to the concentration of animals on a smaller space, all of these sort of things, which we know could potentially have huge negative impacts on animal welfare aside, and also on social sustainability. And so I am very concerned about a lot of the solutions that are being promoted for climate change are really only from the environmental space. And so we're seeing some changes happening that once awareness grows, we could actually be seeing the welfare of those animals going backwards. And so we really need to be part of those conversations.
Dan's last question addressed what key priorities that the program and the animal welfare field as a whole should focus on, once again cueing more discussion on the human determinants of animal welfare.
To think forward about where we need to be going as a program, and if you'd like also perhaps as a field, what do you see as sort of key priorities as we hopefully look forward to another 25 years for the program? What are the kinds of questions and activities that the program should be looking to engage in?
I would say two things. First of all, picking up Sasha's theme, I think human determinants of animal welfare are a huge issue that badly needs attention. Interestingly, Martin Seabrook, who probably nobody remembers Martin Seabrook, he was the one who in the 1970s studied a bunch of small dairy herds and saw that the really productive herds were run by people who he described as confident introverts. And he said, these sort of people aren't very popular at parties, but they're very good with cows. He said this, writing this in the late 70s, there's just been too much emphasis on what environment we put animals in when the human component is such a determinant of their welfare. I think we finally have figured that out. And now it's time to really put focus on that rather than how wide should the stalls be, what should the flooring be, etc. Though the environmental issues are important, no question. But the human elements haven't received nearly enough attention.
I think the big changes coming are going to require transformational change in terms of infrastructure, but not just infrastructure. I think it's also going to create challenges along the entire supply chain. That the finding solutions along that will, for sort of the long-term sustainability of the farm animal industries, is going to require the human side of this to be part of those discussions. And I think to move forward, we're going to need to bring those stakeholders somehow into the fold. It's going to take some innovation and a lot of thought. I think there's scholarship there, but it's not going to be easy. And I think we could play a huge role in that.
We are so excited to share these episodes with you, and in this final quote from Dan, he reiterated the very purpose of hosting the series.
And that is also to help us reflect on where we've been and where we should be going over the next 25 years. So we're hoping to also to harness sort of the collective wisdom of our alumni and of the people who are taking part in these sessions to begin to sketch out what the future could or should look for the program.
Thank you for listening to our bonus podcast episode. And if you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe to never miss a future episode. You can find the Animal Welfare Program on our website at www.awp.landfood.ubc.ca and on our Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter social media channels. Join us next time for our first official episode on achieving change in academia.